So let's read Psalm 45 and pick it up in verse 1. My heart is inditing a good matter. I speak of the things which I have made touching the king. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. I just love the spirit of the psalmist saying, and really he's talking of God. Getting my heart and mind on God and on his future Messiah, getting my pen ready to write of my future king. That's a good thing. Verse 2, Thou art fairer than the children of men. Grace is poured into thy lips, therefore God hath blessed thee forever. Gird thy sword upon thy thigh, O most mighty. See, already God's blessed you forever. This is the most mighty. This is somebody with glory and majesty. So we might be able to say that could be applied to an earthly king, but if it were, it would certainly be exaggerated, okay? But this is not exaggeration. This is truth in reference to the king. Verse 4, In thy majesty ride prosperously because of truth and meekness and righteousness. And thy right hand shall teach thee terrible things. Thine arrows are sharp in the heart of the king's enemies, whereby the people fall under thee. Thy throne, O God, there it is. Thy throne, O God. So the king is called God. Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter. Thou lovest righteousness, hatest wickedness. Therefore God, thy God, hath anointed thee with the oil of gladness above thy fellows. Interesting, verse 7, we get kind of a point, kind of a hat tip to the Trinity. Therefore God, thy God, hath anointed thee. So we see the multiple persons of the Godhead referenced in the psalm. Verse 8, All thy garments smell of myrrh and aloes and cassia, out of the ivory palaces, whereby they have made thee glad. King's daughters were among thy honorable women. Upon thy right hand did stand the queen in gold of Ophir. Hearken, O daughter, consider and incline thine ear. Forget also thine own people and thy father's house. So shall the king greatly desire thy beauty, for he is thy Lord, and worship thou him. And the daughter of Tyre shall be there with a gift. Even the rich among the people shall entreat thy favor. The king's daughter is all glorious within. Her clothing is of wrought gold. She shall be brought unto the king in raiment of needlework. The virgins, her companions that follow her, shall be brought unto thee. That's her bridesmaids, by the way. With gladness and rejoicing shall they be brought. They shall enter into the king's palace. Instead of thy fathers shall be thy children, whom thou mayest make princes in all the earth. I will make thy name to be remembered in all generations. Therefore shall the people praise thee forever and ever. 17 verses, very picturesque, all of it pointing not only to a wedding of a king, probably Solomon, but more beautifully, more powerfully, pointing to the future prophetically, when we as the bride of Christ will be perfectly adorned and brought to him in heaven, where he'll reign forever and ever and ever, and we with him. What an awesome, awesome psalm. So we'll break it down. And I'll take just a minute today, a minute more. I took too long yesterday, and I'm sorry. But I want you to see something. Verse 2, Thou art fairer than the children of men. So it's just referencing God's beauty, Jesus' beauty. Grace is poured into thy lips. So the grace of God flowing through his lips. So Jesus came to preach good news, the gospel, grace. Grace coming from his lips. Therefore God hath blessed thee forever. So here's how I want to take this. I want this to not just describe Jesus to us and put hope within us and evoke worship and awe of Jesus, that here's who he is. It's important that we understand who God is, who Jesus is, by his definition, not by ours. Excuse me. But it's also important that we learn to be like him. Okay? It's also important that we understand we are growing into his likeness, into his image, and we're to be reflecting him. And in verse 2, what challenges me is that the lips of Jesus Christ are gracious. Grace pours in, grace pours out. And because of that, and through that, God's blessing flows. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, this psalm being instructional, and my tongue is the pen of a ready writer. But here in the first 2 verses, we're encouraged to think about lips and words and gracious things. And again, I just want to put out to you that the world is really hard pressed right now for gracious words. There's a lot of bad news. There's a lot of scorn. It's just going to get worse until the election. My first thought this morning is I wish it was November 4th. Although it'll be cold on November 4th, so I kind of don't. But in terms of the election season, I just wish it was over, because I'm so tired of the negativity and the polarization and the politicization of our society, the fight for control. And I think it's an important fight, by the way. I mean, I hope the good side wins. I hope the good powers win. I hope that we preserve our democratic republic. I hope that we strengthen our country for God's glory, for the sake of the gospel. I hope that America comes back to the Lord. But anyway, there's a great dearth for gracious words. Okay, and whether it's making a phone call or sending a text message, or whether it's emailing someone or messaging them on Facebook, or just a post, letting the friends that follow you on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, letting them hear something good, something encouraging, something honoring to God, something gracious. That's really the context here. Grace. I want grace to flow from my lips. I want grace to flow from my life. That's an accurate reflection of Jesus. God's blessings flow from grace and through grace. And as I'm a gracious vessel of grace, I become a conduit of blessing. People can be blessed through us if we'll be like Jesus in that way. Verse 3, I'll touch on very quickly. Gird thy sword upon thy thigh, O most mighty, and with thy glory and thy majesty. What I read in verse 3 is I see verse 2 and 3, Jesus, or this King, Jesus, is going to be, well, actually verse 4 falls into this too. A mighty conqueror and a gracious leader. And isn't that the balance of grace and truth? Okay, I've heard it said that a godly person is both tough and tender. That biblical manhood is both tough and tender, and discerning, knowing when to be tough. When do I gird my sword on my thigh and fight for the people that God's called me to fight for? And I know as a pastor, as a husband, as a dad, He calls me to fight for my family, for my church family, for my school family. And the last 8 years have been a lot of spiritual fighting. Okay, I said to somebody this week who's debating about whether to engage in a battle, and I said, well, you have to discern. Is this a battle that you should walk away from, or is this a battle that God is calling you to enter into? And I said, this may not be a hard and fast rule, but generally speaking, if I'm trying to defend myself, or if I'm fighting for myself, for my own agenda, my own name, my own pay, my own investment, my own blessings, if I'm fighting for me, that's generally a fight I walk away from. I'd have to really think hard as to whether that's always the case. Okay, but I said to this man, this friend of mine, I said, but if this is a fight that you are fighting for someone that God's placed in your life to love and to care for and to protect and to provide for, then that's a fight worth fighting. So you have to discern, is this a fight God's called me to, or is this a fight that God wants me to walk away from? Jesus stepped into the fight, right? Why? For you and for me. We were the joy set before Him. He took the brunt, the guilt, the shame, the pain, the anger, the justice. He died my death. He bore my pain. So He entered into the fight for me. So I see the balance of graciousness but valor, okay? Graciousness, meekness, humility, but courage. And that's something we should all strive for. But then I see this, and I love this. I imagine that Jesus read this psalm many times, or obviously he would have memorized it, right? So I imagine he sung it or quoted it many times during his earthly ministry, if only in his own walk with his Heavenly Father. But this is the words of God to Jesus in a sense. Gird thy sword upon thy thigh, O most mighty, and thy glory and thy majesty. It's basically God saying to Jesus, ride into battle. You are the anointed one. Go do what I've called you to do. And I'm thinking, if I were Jesus, the heavens opened, the dove descended, and the voice of God, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. And I don't believe that Jesus was any different than me in a human sense, or than any of us in a human sense. That validation from his Father, I believe, put courage in him. I believe this verse does the same thing, and it does the same thing to us. There's a 21st century application here that God says to us, you're mine, and you can gird your purpose, your weapons, your resources. You can prepare yourself for the battle to which I've called you, and you can ride into battle with courage, and I'm going to enable you to do what I've created you to do. And that applies to you whether you're a mom, a grandma, a dad, a grandpa, a husband, a wife, a business leader, a worker in the workplace, wherever you serve, whatever you're doing. If God's called you to it, you can gird up your heart and life, and you can ride into battle and embrace the call and the purposes of God by his grace, and trust that he's going to bless and use you today. Just like he said to Jesus, ride into battle. You're mighty. You're mighty. Now, am I mighty in myself? Absolutely not. I am an utter weakling. But in Jesus, he's mighty, and I'm in him, and he's in me. And so through him, I can live a mighty life, okay? And you can too.